A brutal wind swept across the open fields, biting at Ethan Miller's chiseled, wind-burned face as he trudged through his land. The sun was already bleeding across the horizon, casting long orange shadows that starkly contrasted with the unbroken blanket of snow. His experienced gaze took in the devastation from the last blizzard, tallying the cost to his already strained finances. That's when a sound pierced the silence, something so alien in the vast white emptiness that he initially dismissed it as a trick of the wind. A sob, faint, almost swallowed by the gale, but undeniably human. Ethan froze, his heart hammering in his chest as he focused his hearing. The wind maintained its relentless shriek, but in the lulls between gusts he heard it again, the stifled cry of a child. "Is anyone there?" His gruff voice sliced through the frigid air. The crying paused, then resumed, louder this time. He followed the sound, crossing a small pasture until he reached a snowdrift piled high against a dilapidated fence. There, half swallowed by the snow, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5, her coat woefully inadequate for the unforgiving cold. Snow dusted her blonde hair, and her small hands were a raw, angry red. "My God," Ethan breathed, moving closer with a caution born of not wanting to frighten her further. The girl looked up, her large, terrified blue eyes meeting his. Her face was flushed from the cold and streaked with tears. "Hi there, little one," he said, crouching down to her level. "Are you hurt?" The girl just stared, her small body racked with violent shivers. Without a second thought, Ethan shrugged off his own heavy coat, wrapping her in its rough, warm embrace. As he did, his mind was unwillingly yanked back 15 years, to a time when his house was filled with life. His Sarah's laughter echoed through the farmhouse as she chased little Luke down the hall. "Daddy, catch him!" she'd shout, pretending she couldn't keep up with the 3-year-old's wobbly run. Ethan would smile, joining the game, until the coughs began. First Sarah, then Luke. Pneumonia had stolen his family in less than a month, leaving him with a mortgaged farm and a hollowed-out heart. Forcing the ghost from his mind, Ethan refocused on the child before him. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Abby," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "Abby," Ethan repeated gently. "I'm Ethan. Can you tell me how you got out here?" Abby shook her head, fresh tears freezing on her cheeks. "I don't know," she sobbed. "I want to go home." "Where's home?" "Your parents must be worried." Again, just a shake of her head, a look of profound confusion on her small face. Ethan scanned the landscape, but there was nothing but snow stretching to the horizon. No abandoned car, no footprints besides his own. It was as if she'd been dropped from the sky. The sun was disappearing fast, and the temperature was plummeting. He knew he had a choice to make, though it wasn't really a choice at all. Leaving her was a death sentence. She'd freeze in hours. The nearest town, Harmony Creek, was a 40-minute drive, and his old pickup truck was barely reliable. His house, however, was just a 10-minute walk. "Abby," he said softly, "it's getting too cold out here. How about we head to my house? We can warm you up, get you something to eat, then figure out how to get you home. Does that sound good?" Abby hesitated, her blue eyes scrutinizing Ethan's face with a surprising intensity for one so young. At last, she gave a slight nod. "Can I carry you? Your little legs must be tired from all this cold." Another small nod, and Ethan carefully lifted her into his arms. She was ice-cold and weighed almost nothing, a fact that made his heart ache. He adjusted his coat around her and began the trek home, his mind a storm of worry and unanswered questions. Ethan's house was modest and old, but sturdy, the kind of place whose character made up for its lack of polish. A plume of smoke curled from the chimney, a welcome promise of the warmth they both desperately needed. As they neared, Ethan felt Abby straighten in his arms, her eyes wide as she took in the sight of the farmhouse. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her voice still shaky. Yes, Ethan replied, climbing the porch steps. It's not much, but it's cozy. Inside, the heat from the wood-burning stove enveloped them. Ethan gently set Abby down in his favorite armchair by the fire and went to grab some blankets. When he returned, he found her looking around with an air of curiosity, her gaze drifting over the wood-paneled walls, the well-worn but clean furniture, and the old photographs in simple frames. "Here," he said, wrapping her in 2 thick quilts. "I'll make you some hot chocolate." "Do you like hot chocolate?" For the first time, a small smile touched Abby's lips. "With marshmallows?" Ethan felt his own expression soften. "Let me see if I still have some left." In his small kitchen, Ethan moved with the mechanical efficiency of long habit, preparing the hot chocolate while his mind raced. He had to call the authorities, of course, but his first priority was getting this child warm and fed. Rummaging through the cupboards, he found a forgotten bag of marshmallows, one of the few small luxuries he allowed himself. He came back to the living room with 2 steaming mugs, each crowned with a cluster of fluffy white marshmallows. Abby took her mug with both hands, blowing carefully on the hot liquid. "Abby," Ethan began, perching on the edge of the sofa near her armchair, "can you tell me anything else about your home or your family?" The girl sipped her chocolate, leaving a little brown mustache above her lip. Her eyes drifted to the window, where the snow continued to fall in a soft, silent curtain. "I can't really remember," she said quietly, her small hands clutching the mug. Ethan nodded, sensing her distress. "That's okay. How about we eat something? You must be hungry. I can make some eggs and toast. How does that sound?" Abby's face brightened, and she nodded with more enthusiasm. As Ethan cooked the simple meal, his mind churned with possibilities. How could a little girl end up in the middle of his field with no explanation? Why were her memories so fragmented? After Abby had eaten, devouring the food as if she hadn't seen a meal in days, Ethan led her to Luke's old room. The space had been a time capsule for 15 years, a shrine to memories rather than a functional bedroom. He quickly made up a bed with clean sheets and extra blankets. "You can sleep here tonight," he said, helping her get settled. "Tomorrow morning, I'll go into town to find help to locate your family, okay?" Abby was already burrowed under the covers, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Thank you, Ethan," she murmured drowsily. "Sleep well, Abby," he replied softly, pulling the door almost closed. Back in the living room, Ethan sank into his armchair, rubbing his calloused hands over his weary face. The day had begun like any other in his 15 years of solitude, and now he had a lost child sleeping in his deceased son's bed. He picked up the landline and dialed the Harmony Creek Sheriff's Office. After several rings, a tired voice answered. "Harmony Creek Sheriff, good evening." "This is Ethan Miller from the Miller farm," he began, keeping his voice low. "I found a lost girl on my property today. She's no more than 5 years old." There was a rustle of papers on the other end. "A lost girl? Let me check if we have any missing child report." "No, nothing in the past few weeks." "You said you found her today?" "Yes, a few hours ago. She was alone in the middle of the snow, nearly frozen. I brought her inside to warm up." "Did she say anything about how she got there? About her parents?" "Not much. She seems confused, can't remember clearly." The officer sighed. "Look, Ethan, you did the right thing bringing her in from this cold. I'll file a report, and first thing tomorrow, I'll send a squad car out to you. I'll also contact social services. In the meantime, just keep her warm and safe." "All right," Ethan replied, feeling an odd pang in his chest at the thought of handing Abby over to strangers. "I'll be waiting." After hanging up, Ethan sat for a long time, watching the fire dance and die down. The wind outside had picked up again, whistling through the cracks of the old house. He stood to add another log, his eyes landing on a photograph on the mantelpiece, himself, Sarah, and Luke, smiling at a summer picnic in what felt like another lifetime. 15 years of solitude had hardened Ethan Miller. Losing his family had carved a void he never tried to fill, choosing instead to lose himself in the backbreaking work of the farm, letting the days blur into a lonely, predictable pattern. Yet now, with a lost child under his roof, something was stirring within him, a sense of purpose he thought was long dead. As he prepared to sleep on the couch just outside the room where Abby lay, Ethan could not have imagined that his simple act of saving a little girl from the snow was about to irrevocably alter the course of his life. Outside, the snow fell without a sound, burying any clue that might explain Abby's mysterious arrival. And as the night deepened, the mystery of her appearance was only just beginning to unfold. Time flows strangely when your life is upended. For Ethan Miller, the weeks following Abby's arrival at his farm were both a whirlwind and an eternity. The harsh winter began to retreat, and with it, the solitary routine that had defined his last 15 years melted away into something new and unforeseen. Mornings at the Miller farm now started with the patter of small feet on the wooden floor of the hallway. Abby had developed the habit of waking with the sun, a fact that still amused Ethan, who assumed most kids were late sleepers. She would always wait for him in the same spot, the bench by the kitchen window, her little legs swinging as she watched the world outside come to life. On this particular late winter morning, Abby was especially animated, the melting snow revealing dark, promising patches of earth. "Ethan, look, the flowers are starting to appear," she exclaimed, pointing to tiny green shoots near the window. Ethan joined her, recognizing the early signs of spring. "They're crocuses," he explained. "They're always the first to pop up, even before the snow's completely gone." Abby absorbed this new piece of information with the serious focus she applied to everything Ethan taught her about the farm. It was one of her most fascinating qualities, this ability to switch between the spontaneous joy of a child and moments of almost startling maturity. Breakfast had become a ritual Ethan never thought he'd enjoy again. After years of being content with black coffee and dry toast, he now found himself planning meals, determined to give Abby something fun and nutritious. "Today we have special pancakes," he announced, artfully pouring batter into the pan to create what he hoped was a rabbit. Abby leaned over the counter, observing his work critically. "It looks more like a bear," she commented with surprising diplomacy, her tone almost refined for a child her age. Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, I think I need more practice. Want to try making the next one?" Her eyes lit up. Ethan fetched a stool so she could safely reach the stove, and together they made a series of pancakes in increasingly abstract shapes. Abby had a natural knack for it, her small hands moving the ladle with an unexpected steadiness. "Where did you learn to cook so well?" Ethan asked, watching her put the final touches on a perfectly round pancake. Abby's brow furrowed in that familiar expression of confusion. I don't know. I guess someone taught me before. It was always this way." Whenever her past came up, it was like trying to see through a thick fog, with only occasional shapes emerging. Ethan had learned not to press, gently changing the subject when he saw her distress. The weeks fostered a comfortable rhythm between them. After breakfast, Abby would follow Ethan on his farm chores, a shadow asking endless questions. Her genuine curiosity was endearing, even when her questions hinted at a life very different from this one. "Why do you clean the barn by yourself?" she asked one morning, watching him work. At the other house, there were always lots of people doing things. Ethan paused, leaning on his shovel. "Well, it's just the two of us here, and sometimes it's good to do things with our own hands." Abby contemplated this for a moment, then picked up a small spade Martha had brought for her. "Can I help too?" Ethan's heart swelled at the gesture. "Of course you can, little one." It was during one of these shared work mornings that Martha Olson appeared. Their neighbor, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, had made a habit of checking in on Ethan since his family passed. Her old blue sedan rattled up the dirt drive, kicking up a small cloud of dust. "I heard in town that you had a visitor," Martha said, her gaze quickly finding Abby, who was inspecting the chickens. Abby looked up at the new voice and, to the adult's astonishment, stood gracefully, brushed off her simple dress with delicate motions, and performed a small curtsy. "Good morning, ma'am," she said, her voice clear and polite. "I'm Abby." Martha shot Ethan a wide-eyed look before crouching down to Abby's level. "Hello, dear. I'm Martha. I live on the neighboring property." That meeting was a turning point. Martha, a retired elementary school teacher, became a regular visitor, bringing books, games, and art supplies for Abby. Her presence gave Ethan time to focus on more demanding tasks, while Abby enjoyed companionship and age-appropriate learning. It was through Abby's art that more clues about her past began to surface. One afternoon, as Martha supervised a drawing session at the kitchen table, Abby produced a remarkable picture. It was a house, or rather a mansion, rendered with a specificity that was stunning for a 5-year-old. The drawing showed an imposing structure with tall, arched windows, a grand staircase sweeping up to the main entrance, and a formal garden with an ornate fountain. The figures in the drawing wore elegant clothes, and Abby had even included details like chandeliers visible through the windows and luxury cars in the driveway. "That's a beautiful place, Abby," Martha commented gently. Abby continued coloring, her tongue sticking out in concentration. "It's where they have parties," she said absently, "with piano music and people dancing. The women wear dresses that sparkle when they twirl." Ethan and Martha exchanged a look. The description was too vivid to be a simple fantasy. "Have you been to a party like that?" Ethan asked, testing the waters. Abby paused, her face taking on that faraway look that signaled she was trying to grasp a memory. "I think so. There was pretty music, and the lights were all golden." In the following days, more signs of Abby's enigmatic background appeared. Martha had brought over some old dresses for Abby to play dress-up, and the girl not only knew precisely how each piece should be worn, but also demonstrated a surprising knowledge of fabrics. "This one's cotton," she remarked, running her fingers over a blue dress. "It's good for warm days, but not suitable for formal occasions." "How do you know so much about clothes?" Martha asked, fascinated. Abby just shrugged, that characteristic gesture she made when an explanation was beyond her reach. "I just do." A necessary trip into town revealed even more. Harmony Creek was a small town, with one main street that held all the local shops. For Ethan, who only went when absolutely necessary, it was more than enough. But Abby navigated the environment with surprising poise. In the local grocery store, while Ethan gathered his usual staples, Abby walked the aisles with her back straight and her hands clasped politely in front of her. Her eyes scanned the shelves with polite interest. "Could we get some Belgian chocolates?" she asked, stopping before a small imported goods section. "And maybe some jasmine tea?" Ethan and Martha shared another startled glance. It wasn't just what she chose, but how she carried herself. For a moment, it was as if a little society heiress had replaced the farm girl. The most revealing moment happened in the checkout line. Abby was idly flipping through a magazine when her attention was completely captured. It was an article about a charity gala at the Henderson Mansion, a historic estate on the other side of the state. The photo showed a lavish ballroom with crystal chandeliers and guests in black tie attire. Abby's reaction was immediate. Her small hands began to tremble as her fingers traced the ballroom in the photograph. Her blue eyes widened, fixed on a specific point in the image. "Abby," Ethan asked gently, "do you recognize that place?" "It looks like the party house," she murmured, her voice distant. "The chandeliers are similar, and the stairs, too. But it's not the same one." "What do you mean, not the same?" Martha asked softly. Abby continued to study the photo, a frown of concentration on her brow. "The other house is bigger, and it has a special garden where the flowers look like they glow when it's dark." She touched the page again before looking up at Ethan. But this isn't the house from the picture. Later, after Abby was asleep, Ethan and Martha talked in low voices on the porch. The night was clear, and the stars were brilliant above the farm fields. "It can't be a coincidence," Martha said thoughtfully. "The way she acts, the things she knows. Abby clearly comes from a very different world." Ethan nodded, his face etched with worry. "You saw how she behaved in the store, like a little princess. And that drawing of the mansion, the details were too specific to be made up." Martha added, "Ethan, this girl must come from a very influential family." "That's what worries me," he admitted, running a hand over his tired face. "If her family is really powerful, what happens when they find her? How will they react to learning that a child of her social standing spent weeks on a simple farm?" "You saved her, Ethan," Martha said firmly. "You found a child nearly frozen in the snow and took her in. No one can blame you for that." "It's not that simple," Ethan argued. "Rich, powerful people. They can twist things, make them look different from what they really are. What if they think I had something to do with her disappearance?" Martha placed a comforting hand on his arm. "You've done everything right. You notified the authorities immediately. You've cared for her like your own daughter." Her voice softened on the last word, both of them aware of its weight. Ethan hadn't been a father for 15 years, not since he lost Luke. Now, in just a few weeks, he had become a father figure to a mysterious child from a world completely alien to his own. The sound of light footsteps interrupted them. Abby appeared at the screen door, clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest. "Can't sleep, little one?" Ethan asked softly. Abby shook her head, her golden curls bouncing. "Can I sit with you for a bit?" Ethan opened his arms, and Abby immediately scrambled into his lap, snuggling against his chest as she had done so many times. In these moments, Ethan felt the powerful bond that had grown between them, a connection that transcended social class and mysterious origins. Martha watched with a gentle smile, marveling at how perfectly Abby fit in Ethan's arms, as if she were meant to be there. But her teacher's eyes also noted the small details that made Abby so unique. The innate grace of her posture, even in relaxation, the sophisticated vocabulary that sometimes slipped out, the quiet elegance in her every move. "Look, a shooting star!" Abby suddenly exclaimed, pointing toward the heavens. "Make a wish," Martha suggested. Abby squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, then opened them with a small smile. "Done." "Want to tell us what you wished for?" Ethan asked. "You can't," she answered seriously. "If you tell, it won't come true. It's like tea etiquette. There are rules you have to follow." Once again, Ethan and Martha exchanged significant looks. "Tea etiquette?" Martha asked gently, but Abby was already gazing back at the stars, seemingly unaware of the weight of her casual remark. Ethan held her a little tighter, feeling the bittersweet reality of the moment. Each day brought new clues about Abby's past, and with them the growing certainty that their time together was finite. The wind whispered through the new wheat, carrying the sweet promise of spring. Abby began to hum softly, a complex classical melody you wouldn't expect to hear on a farm. Somewhere out there, a family was searching for her, a family with more resources and influence than Ethan could possibly imagine. And the more attached he grew to the little girl who had brought light back to his life, the more he dreaded the inevitable day he would have to let her go. "I think it's time for someone to get back to bed," Martha said gently, noticing Abby was starting to doze in Ethan's arms. "Just a little longer," Abby mumbled sleepily, nestling closer. "Come on, little one," Ethan said, standing carefully with her in his arms. "Tomorrow we have to get up early to feed the chickens, remember? Miss Beatrice won't be happy if we're late." Abby agreed, referring to the hen she had named with such surprising formality. Martha watched Ethan carry Abby inside, noting how he had slipped back into the role of a father, something she never thought she'd see again after the tragedy that had shattered his family. It was a beautiful transformation, but also a precarious one. After tucking Abby in, Ethan returned to the porch where Martha waited, her expression thoughtful. "You know it can't last forever," she said gently. Ethan leaned against the porch rail, his gaze fixed on the dark fields. "I know," he answered, his voice low, "but I can't help wishing it could." The night was quiet, broken only by the distant chirp of a cricket. In her room, Abby slept soundly, her stuffed rabbit held tight. In her dreams, two different worlds collided. Grand ballrooms with glittering chandeliers and cozy barns smelling of hay, sparkling party gowns and simple overalls with pockets full of chicken feed. A mysterious mansion with glowing gardens and a humble farm stretching to the horizon. And at the center of it all was the constant, reassuring presence of Ethan, the kind-hearted farmer who had become the protector she needed, even if their time together was as uncertain as the mist beginning to rise over the sleeping fields. The Sterling mansion stood like a fortress against the night sky, its windows glowing like watchful eyes over the snow-dusted gardens. Inside its stone walls the activity was ceaseless. Security guards patrolled the grounds, their flashlight beams dancing like nervous fireflies. In the main office, Richard Sterling bent over his mahogany desk, poring over maps and reports. At 55, he radiated an aura of command, though in recent weeks his posture had slumped under the weight of worry. His eyes, usually sharp enough to dissect any business deal, were now shadowed with exhaustion. "Nothing," he muttered, shoving another report aside. "Absolutely nothing." On a couch near the fireplace, Vivian Sterling looked up from her tablet, which displayed the latest news about their missing daughter. Like her husband, she was a portrait of exhaustion. Her usually elegant face was pale, her impeccable chignon replaced by a simple ponytail. Mr. Davies, the most respected private investigator on the East Coast, cleared his throat. "Mr. Sterling, we've expanded the search to every major city within a 300-mile radius. We have teams at every airport, bus station, and port." "And yet, not a single lead," Richard said, raking a hand through his graying hair. "How does a child simply vanish without a trace?" The disappearance itself was maddeningly simple. On a seemingly normal afternoon, Abby had been playing in the mansion's sunroom, supervised by her nanny, Mary Ann. In the few minutes it took Mary Ann to answer an urgent phone call from her daughter, Abby was gone. The security cameras, which covered nearly every inch of the estate, had inexplicably malfunctioned for the crucial 15 minutes leading up to her disappearance. An immediate search of the sprawling grounds yielded nothing. It was as if Abby had simply evaporated into thin air. "Double the reward," Richard ordered, "from 2 to 4 million. "Richard," Vivian intervened, her voice trembling, "we've already tried that. It just attracts more." "I know," he interrupted gently, "but I can't stop trying everything in our power." The media, naturally, was in a frenzy. Missing Sterling heiress, mystery at the mansion. These were the milder headlines. Reporters were camped outside the estate gates day and night, their cameras poised for any sign of a development. A soft knock on the door broke the tension. Veronica Morgan, Vivian's younger sister, entered with a tea tray. As always, she was flawlessly dressed in a Chanel suit, her dark hair a stark contrast to her sister's blonde and perfectly coiffed. "I thought you might need something to drink," she said, setting the tray on a side table. "Vivian, dear, you barely touched your dinner." Vivian accepted a cup with a small, grateful nod. Veronica had flown in 2 weeks after Abby vanished, canceling a major art exhibition in Paris to be with her family. "Any news?" Veronica asked, pouring a cup for Richard. "None," he replied bitterly. "It's like searching for a needle in a haystack." "Have you considered expanding the search to the West Coast?" Veronica suggested, settling gracefully into an armchair. Abby was always fascinated by the ocean. "There are so many exclusive resorts in California." Richard and Vivian exchanged a glance. It was true. Abby had expressed an interest in the sea, though they rarely traveled west. "Richard?" Vivian prompted. The investigator made a note on his tablet. I can dispatch a few teams to check major resorts and tourist areas in California, although with the media exposure this case has... Someone would have recognized her, Vivian finished, her voice cracking. Veronica rose and walked to the window. Outside, the meticulously landscaped gardens were covered in a blanket of snow, the ornamental fountains frozen into ice sculptures. The marble bench near the rose bushes, Abby's favorite spot for watching fireflies, looked forlorn and abandoned. "She's a sterling," Veronica said, her voice carrying a strange inflection. "Too clever for her own good, isn't that right, Vivian? So much like you at that age." Vivian shivered slightly at her sister's comment. There was an off note in Veronica's tone, like a familiar tune played in the wrong key. "Veronica," she said softly, "are you okay? You seem—" "Of course I'm fine," Veronica replied a little too quickly. "I'm just worried about my dear niece. And about you naturally. I always worry about you, little sister." Mr. Davies observed the interaction with professional detachment, his notes now focusing on something other than standard leads. The night wore on, bringing with it a deepening sense of helplessness. Vivian retreated to her bedroom window, her eyes scanning the illuminated gardens where she had once played with Abby for hours. "She must be so scared," Vivian whispered, her voice breaking. "My baby." "She's never spent a single night away from home." Richard joined her, wrapping a protective arm around her. Veronica watched them with a complex expression, a flicker of something unreadable, not quite concern, that crossed her face before her mask of sympathy slipped back into place. "I'll go see if the staff need anything," Veronica announced, standing. "Maybe call a few contacts in Paris, see if I can mobilize more resources for the search." After she left, a heavy silence descended on the office. Mr. Davies continued to make notes on his tablet, plotting the next steps of a fruitless investigation. Outside, the snow began to fall again, cloaking the Sterling Mansion gardens in a fresh shroud of white. In her room, Vivian would eventually succumb to an exhausted, restless sleep, haunted by visions of her little Abby, lost somewhere far away. Elsewhere in the mansion, Veronica Morgan walked the silent corridors, her high heels clicking on the marble like a metronome, counting down the seconds until all secrets were brought to light. Spring had arrived at the Miller farm, transforming the snow-covered fields into a tapestry of green and wildflowers. The changing season brought new routines and a deepening bond between Ethan and little Abby. The nights, however, remained a challenge. On one particularly difficult night, Ethan was jolted awake by the now familiar sound of Abby calling for him. He rose from the couch where he'd slept since her arrival and hurried to her room. Abby was sitting bolt upright in bed, her blue eyes wide with terror in the dim light, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Ethan didn't need to turn on a light to see the silent tears streaming down her face. "Hey, little one," he said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Another nightmare?" Abby nodded and launched herself into his arms. Ethan held her close, feeling her small heart race against his chest. "Want to tell me about the dream?" he asked gently, stroking her golden hair. "It was dark," she murmured into his shirt. "And cold. I was lost and couldn't find my way back." Ethan hugged her tighter. "You're not lost now. You're safe here with me." This scene had repeated itself often over the past few weeks. Abby's nightmares were frequent, but vague, always centered on feelings of fear, cold, and being lost. Dawn was breaking when Martha arrived the next morning. She found Ethan in the kitchen making breakfast while Abby slept. "Another rough night?" she asked, noting the dark circles under his eyes. Ethan nodded, pouring coffee for them both. "Same nightmare as always." "She gets so scared, Martha." In the small living area, the television was on, the morning news a low murmur in the background. On the screen, a serious anchor discussed the case captivating the nation, the mysterious disappearance of the Sterling heiress. Photos of a 5-year-old girl with blonde hair and blue eyes filled the screen, showing her at society events in elegant dresses. "The search for little Abby Sterling continues," the anchor said. "The reward has been raised to $4 million for any information leading to—" But Ethan and Martha, deep in their conversation, paid the television no mind. They were focused on finding ways to help Abby feel more secure. "I've been thinking," Martha said. "Maybe we should create a more structured routine for her, something that grounds her." Together, they devised a plan. Mornings would be for farm chores, with Abby helping Ethan in age-appropriate ways. Afternoons would be for quiet activities like drawing, reading, and games. Evenings would feature a special bedtime ritual. Abby loved the idea, especially helping with the farm work. There was something about the predictability of the tasks that seemed to soothe her, giving her a sense of purpose. "Look, Abby," Ethan explained as they planted sunflower seeds in small pots. "Each seed has all the potential to become a magnificent flower. It just needs care, patience, and love to grow." Abby considered this with great seriousness, her small hands smudged with dirt as she carefully covered a seed. "Like how you take care of me?" Ethan's heart stuttered. "Yes, little one, just like I take care of you." It was during one of these lessons that it happened. Ethan was showing Abby how to tell if a tomato was ripe enough to pick when she said something that changed everything. "Daddy, is this one good to pick?" The words slipped out so naturally that Abby didn't seem to notice, but Ethan froze, his heart hammering. It was the first time she had called him that. Abby must have sensed his stillness because she looked up at him with a worried expression. "Sorry. I didn't mean—" "No, no," Ethan said quickly, pulling her into a hug. "You can call me that if you want, little one. I'd be very happy." Later that night, after Abby was asleep, Ethan shared the news with Martha. They sat in the living room, the TV still on, but now tuned to a cooking show. "She called me Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It came out so naturally. As they talked, the show was interrupted by a special news bulletin. Abby Sterling's face once again filled the screen, along with images of the Sterling mansion and its snowy gardens. The reporter spoke of new leads being investigated, showing clips of interviews with a devastated Richard and Vivian Sterling. But Ethan and Martha, on the other side of the room, missed the broadcast entirely, lost in their conversation. "It's no surprise," Martha was saying. "You've been more of a father to her in these last months than anyone else in her life." "But that's just it, isn't it?" Ethan said, rubbing his hand over his face. "Somewhere out there, she has a real family, parents who must be searching for her. And that worries you?" "Of course it does," Ethan admitted. "But at the same time, Martha, I can't imagine my life without her now. I know it's selfish, but—" "It's not selfish to want to care for a child who clearly needs you," Martha interjected. "You gave her a home, safety, love. That's never selfish." On the TV, the segment ended with a hotline number for tips about Abby Sterling, but the glowing screen had become a forgotten bluish flicker on the walls of the dimly lit room. "You really do want to raise her permanently, don't you?" Martha asked softly. Ethan looked out the window at the emerging stars. "More than anything," he admitted. "I know it's crazy, that it's probably not possible. But she brought life back to this farm, Martha." "To me?" Martha watched her old friend with deep affection. The change in Ethan over the past few months was staggering. The man who had retreated into grief now smiled again, a new light in his eyes, a renewed purpose. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night. Ethan was on his feet and running before the sound faded, his body reacting instinctively. Martha followed him to the bedroom, where they found Abby sitting up in bed, trembling. "Daddy!" she cried when she saw Ethan, her arms outstretched. Ethan enveloped her in a protective hug, murmuring comforting words. Martha stood in the doorway, her heart aching at the scene. The way Abby clung to Ethan, the way he cradled her, it was a perfect picture of a father and daughter. Later, after Abby had fallen back asleep, Ethan and Martha returned to the porch. The night was clear, the stars bright above the silent fields. "You're a wonderful father, Ethan," Martha said softly. Ethan swallowed hard, his emotions raw. "I'm afraid, Martha. Afraid that one day someone will come for her and I'll have to let her go." "I know," Martha replied, squeezing his arm. "But for now, she needs you, and you need her." The night passed peacefully, the stars standing guard over the slumbering farm. In her room, Abby slept, her dreams now filled with sunflowers and magical stories, secure in the knowledge that her daddy was nearby to chase away any fears. And on the porch, Ethan Miller, the once lonely farmer who had become a father again, made quiet plans for a future he could no longer imagine without his little Abby. The idea for the outing came on a beautiful spring morning. The sun cast a golden glow over the fields of the Miller farm, and Martha watched Abby in the yard, chasing butterflies with the pure joy that only a child can possess. It was then that she decided it was time to broaden the girl's horizons. "She needs new clothes," Martha argued with Ethan later that day. "And it would be nice for her to have a different afternoon, do something special." Ethan hesitated, his hands busy mending a fence in the barn. The thought of Abby being out of his sight, even for a few hours, sent a knot of anxiety through his stomach that he couldn't quite explain. "I'm not sure, Martha. She's so well adjusted here." "Precisely," Martha insisted. "She's safe and happy. A small trip won't change that. Besides, Asheville is much bigger than Harmony Creek. They have better stores, a lovely ice cream parlor." The mention of ice cream made Abby, who had been helping Ethan sort nails into a coffee can, look up with keen interest. "Can we get ice cream, Martha?" she asked, her blue eyes shining. Martha smiled. "Any flavors you want, sweetie." Ethan looked from one hopeful face to the other, his resistance melting. Abby's smile had that effect on him. The world brightened when she was happy. "Asheville is almost 2 hours away," he began, though his tone had already conceded defeat. "And I'm an excellent driver," Martha finished. "Plus, we're just going for some shopping, then ice cream, and we'll head right back." What could possibly go wrong? Later, Ethan would replay those words with a bitter irony that would haunt him. The next morning, the sun was barely up, but Abby was already awake, practically vibrating with excitement. Dressed in her best outfit, a light blue dress Martha had brought her and her favorite little brown boots, she looked like a tiny farm princess. "Remember the rule?" Ethan asked as he braided her hair, his calloused fingers surprisingly deft after months of practice. "Always stay close to Martha," Abby recited solemnly. "Don't talk to strangers, and if I get lost, stay where I am and wait." "That's right," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. "And what else?" Abby turned to him, a radiant smile lighting up the kitchen. "Love you a lot, and come back soon." Ethan hugged her tightly, fighting an unexplainable sense of foreboding. It was foolish, he knew. Martha was perfectly capable of looking after Abby for a few hours. Still, something about the morning, the way the wind blew, the way the shadows fell, made him uneasy. "Maybe I should go with you," he suggested for the third time when Martha arrived in her blue sedan. "Ethan Miller," Martha said, hands on her hips. "You've got a barn to fix, and I promise to help you with it tomorrow. Let us have our girls' afternoon in peace." Abby was already bouncing with excitement by the car, her golden curls gleaming. "Please, Daddy, I promise I'll bring you back a surprise." The word Daddy was still new enough to melt Ethan's heart every time. It was a magic word that could dissolve any worry. All right, he relented, helping Abby into the car. "But call me when you get there, okay? And every hour after that." "Promised," Martha said, rolling her eyes affectionately at her friend's overprotectiveness. Ethan stood in the dirt driveway, watching the blue car disappear around a bend. The apprehension hadn't faded, but he pushed it aside. There was work to do, and focusing on it would help the time pass until Abby returned. The drive to Asheville was filled with songs and chatter. Abby was captivated by the changing landscape, especially as the first signs of the city emerged. Buildings taller than anything in Harmony Creek, bustling streets, and colorful shopfronts. "Look at all those stores," she exclaimed, her nose pressed against the window. Martha smiled, delighted by her enthusiasm. She found a parking spot near the main street and helped Abby out. The city was busy on a Saturday, with family shopping and tourists snapping pictures of Asheville's historic architecture. "First, we buy what we need," Martha announced. "Then, ice cream. How does that sound?" Abby nodded cheerfully, taking Martha's hand as they walked down the crowded sidewalk. Her eyes took in every detail with a mix of fascination and something else, something Martha couldn't quite identify. As if flashes of recognition flickered in her eyes before vanishing. Their first stop was a children's clothing store. Abby, who usually showed surprisingly sophisticated taste, was drawn to simple, practical items. "This is perfect for helping Daddy on the farm," she said, holding up a pair of overalls embroidered with flowers. Martha's heart tightened. It was amazing how completely Abby had embraced farm life, how she had adopted her new reality with Ethan. It was hard to imagine that this same girl had appeared mysteriously in a snowstorm just a few months ago. After selecting some new clothes, they headed to a bookstore. Abby made a beeline for the children's section, her eyes shining at the colorful shelves. "Can I pick a book for Daddy to read me at bedtime?" she asked, already carefully examining the options. "Of course, honey," Martha replied, watching as Abby ran her small fingers over the book spines with a reverence that seemed beyond her years. It was as they were leaving the bookstore that everything went wrong. The window display of a toy store across the street caught Abby's eye. It was nothing special, just a standard collection of teddy bears and wooden trains. But something about it made Abby let go of Martha's hand and dart towards it. "Abby, wait!" Martha called, but her voice was lost in the city noise. It happened in seconds. A group of tourists walked between them, momentarily blocking Martha's view. When the path cleared, Abby was gone. Panic was immediate and overwhelming. Martha spun in every direction, her eyes frantically scanning the crowd for the familiar golden curls. "Abby!" she yelled, her voice laced with desperation. "Abby!" People began to stop, some offering help, others just staring. Martha barely noticed them, racing back and forth across the street, peering into every shop, calling Abby's name over and over. With trembling hands, she fumbled for her phone and dialed Ethan's number. Each ring felt like an eternity as her mind spun 1,000 terrible scenarios. "Martha?" Ethan's concerned voice came through. "What happened?" "Ethan," her own voice broke, tears streaming down her face. "Abby, I lost her. She was right here, and then—" "What?" Terror was raw in Ethan's voice. "What do you mean you lost her?" "She saw something in a window. Let go of my hand for just a second. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I'm on my way," he cut in, and she could hear him moving on the other end. "Keep looking. I'll be there as fast as I can." Martha continued her frantic search, now joined by a few shopkeepers and sympathetic passers-by. The police were called, and soon squad cars were cruising the area. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Robert and Mary Chen were leaving their favorite bakery when they spotted a small, solitary figure on the sidewalk. The girl was clearly lost, her blue eyes wide with fear as she looked around. "Look," Mary murmured, squeezing her husband's arm. "Isn't that—" Robert was already reaching for his phone, quickly opening his browser. There it was, the photo that had been all over the news for weeks. Abby Sterling, the missing heiress. The face was unmistakable, even in the simple clothes she wore now, so different from the fancy attire in the news photos. "Excuse me, sweetie," Mary said, approaching Abby gently. "Are you lost?" Abby nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't find Martha." "It's okay," Mary assured her, crouching down. "We'll help you find her." Robert was already dialing the hotline number for information about Abby. Within minutes, the news that the Sterling heiress had been found spread like wildfire. Back at the Sterling mansion, Richard was in a video conference when his assistant burst into the office without knocking, something that hadn't happened in 15 years. "Mr. Sterling," she said breathlessly. "They found her. Abby is in Asheville." Richard spilled his coffee, barely noticing the hot liquid soaking his important papers. "Are you sure? Absolutely sure?" "Yes, sir. A couple found her. The police are already there, and—" But Richard was already moving, phone in hand. "Get the helicopter ready," he ordered. "And find Vivian. Immediately." Ethan Miller drove his old pickup far faster than it was ever meant to go, his heart pounding so hard it nearly drowned out the engine's roar. A drive that normally took 2 hours, he planned to make in much less. "Please," he murmured over and over, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Please let her be all right." When he finally reached Asheville, he found the main street in chaos. Police cars blocked intersections, and a crowd of reporters and onlookers had gathered outside a cafe. Sarah found him before he could even park, running to the truck with a tear-streaked face. "Ethan, they found her." "She's—" "Where?" he interrupted, already jumping from the cab. "Inside the cafe." "But Ethan, there's something you should know." He was already sprinting, pushing through the crowd. Officers tried to stop him, but Martha shouted who he was, and they let him pass. Inside the cafe, Abby sat at a table sipping a hot chocolate, watched over by a middle-aged couple and several police officers. The moment she saw him, her face lit up. "Daddy!" she yelled, jumping from her chair and racing toward him. Ethan scooped her up, hugging her so tightly, tears streamed down his face. "Don't ever do that to me again, little one. Never again." That's when he heard the thumping sound of approaching helicopter rotors, and the buzz from the crowd outside intensified. "Mr. Miller?" Ethan turned, still holding Abby, to find a police officer with a serious expression. "Yes, sir. We need to talk. It's about Abby's true identity." Just then, the cafe doors opened, and a couple hurried in. The man was tall and commanding, with gray hair and a suit that probably cost more than Ethan's entire farm. The woman was elegant and delicate, with the same golden hair as Abby. In Ethan's arms, Abby went rigid. Her small fingers clutched his shirt tighter, her eyes wide as they locked onto the newcomers. "Abby?" The woman's voice trembled. "Oh my God, it's really you." "Mommy?" Abby's voice was a barely audible whisper, filled with confusion and disbelief. Ethan felt his entire world collapse with that single word. Of course. How had he not seen it before? Abby's refined manners, her knowledge of things so far beyond a simple farm life, the nightmares. "Mr. Miller," the officer said quietly, "allow me to introduce Richard and Vivian Sterling, Abby's parents." Abby began to tremble in Ethan's arms, her hands gripping him even tighter. Her next whispered words broke everyone's heart. But Ethan is my daddy, too." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Richard Sterling took a step forward, his eyes studying both his daughter and the man who held her. "Mr. Miller," he began, his voice controlled but sincere. "There aren't enough words to express our gratitude. You saved and cared for our daughter when we—" "Please," Ethan interrupted softly. "You don't have to. I only did what anyone would have done." "No," Vivian said, stepping forward cautiously. "Not everyone would have opened their heart and their home like that. Abby? She's so well looked after." Abby glanced from her biological parents back to Ethan, clearly struggling to process the situation. "I don't want to leave," she declared suddenly, tightening her hold on Ethan. "I want to stay with Daddy Ethan on the farm." Pain flickered across Vivian's face, but before she could speak, the cafe doors opened again. Veronica Morgan entered, elegant as ever in her Chanel suit. "Thank heavens," she exclaimed. "I came as soon as I heard." The reaction was immediate. Abby let out a small, terrified gasp and buried her face in Ethan's neck, her entire body shaking. "The mean aunt," she whispered, so softly only Ethan could hear. A cold chill ran down Ethan's spine. The puzzle pieces were starting to fall into place. Abby's nightmares, her inexplicable fear, the mystery of how she ended up on his farm. Richard and Vivian exchanged worried glances, clearly seeing Abby's reaction. Veronica paused, her expression shifting from feigned concern to something else, something that made Ethan's protective instincts flare. Perhaps Martha, who had been observing quietly, suggested, "We should give Abby a bit of space. It's been an intense day." "Yes," Vivian agreed quickly. "We don't have to figure everything out right now. The important thing is that our daughter is safe." "And so well cared for," Richard added, giving Ethan a meaningful look. "Mr. Miller, we'd very much like to speak with you further. Understand how all this happened." Ethan nodded, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He loved Abby as his own, but he knew he had no legal right to her. Still, her reaction to Veronica deeply troubled him. "The farm isn't far," he offered. Maybe we could continue this conversation there." It would be quieter for Abby. The Sterlings readily agreed, showing a consideration that surprised Ethan. Veronica started to protest, but Vivian cut her off gently. "Veronica, dear, why don't you head back to the mansion? We'll organize everything there for Abby's return." A flash of anger crossed Veronica's face, but she quickly regained her composure. Of course. Family first, right?" As Veronica left, Ethan felt Abby relax slightly in his arms. The child looked at him, then at her parents. "Can we all go see the sunflowers we planted?" she asked timidly. "They're almost blooming." "Sure we can, little one," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. Vivian discreetly wiped away a tear as she watched the undeniable connection between her daughter and the farmer. Richard placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. As the group prepared to leave the cafe, Ethan fought to steady himself. He knew the right thing was to return Abby to her parents. They had the legal right. They had raised her. But his heart shattered at the thought of losing her. The afternoon sun was setting as they left the city in a small caravan. Ethan's pickup, with Abby still in his arms and Martha at the wheel, followed by the Sterlings' car. On the horizon, dark clouds gathered, promising a storm. It was as if the sky itself reflected the emotional turmoil everyone faced. The love of two parents for their child, Abby's fear and confusion, the unrevealed secrets behind her disappearance, and the unsettling shadow of her reaction to her aunt. Ethan knew the coming hours would be crucial. Tough decisions would have to be made, painful truths confronted. For now, he just held Abby a little closer, feeling her small heart beat against his, and prayed that somehow everything would work out. The library of the Sterling mansion had become a command center. Mr. Davies, the lead investigator, had set up his base there, the elegant mahogany desk now covered with reports, photos, and timelines. The morning was gray, matching the tense atmosphere. Abby had spent the night in her old bedroom, but only after Ethan agreed to stay in a guest room down the hall. The bond between them was too strong to sever abruptly, and the Sterlings, despite their own heartache, had been surprisingly understanding. "Ms. Olson," Mr. Davies began, adjusting his glasses as he consulted his notes. "Could you tell us more about how Mr. Miller cared for Abby during these months?" Martha sat stiffly in a leather armchair, her hands clasped in her lap. Richard and Vivian Sterling occupied the sofa, while Ethan stood by the window, occasionally glancing out at the garden where Abby was playing under the watchful eye of two security guards. Ethan is the father Abby needed at that moment, Martha replied, her voice steady. He reorganized his entire life for her. He transformed his late son's old bedroom, a son he lost, I might add, into a safe space for Abby. He learned to braid hair, to make fun breakfast, to tell bedtime stories. Vivian dabbed at a tear. The devotion this stranger had shown their daughter was both a comfort and a pang of pain. "What about the nightmares?" Mr. Davies asked. "You mentioned Abby had them frequently." "Yes," Martha confirmed. "In the beginning, almost every night. Ethan would spend hours comforting her, singing lullabies, making hot chocolate until she calmed down. Did she say what frightened her in these nightmares?" Martha hesitated, exchanging a look with Ethan. It was always something about being lost in the cold, about running from something or someone. Mr. Davies jotted down more notes. "Did she ever specifically mention how she ended up at the farm?" "Not exactly," Ethan said, finally stepping away from the window. "But there were moments, little things she'd say or do." A sudden shout from the garden cut him off. Everyone rushed to the window, but it was clear Abby had only been startled by a playful squirrel. Still, something in the scene caught Ethan's eye. "She's doing it again," he muttered. "Doing what?" Mr. Davies asked, instantly alert. "That motion with her hands, like she's shielding herself from something. She did it during her nightmares, too." Vivian moved closer to the window, watching her daughter with new focus. "It's true. She used to do that when she was smaller, especially when—" Her voice faltered, and Richard finished for her. "When Veronica was around." A heavy silence filled the library, broken by the door opening. Mary Ann, Abby's former nanny, entered with a tray of tea. "Pardon me," she said softly. "I thought everyone might want something to drink." As Mary Ann poured, Mr. Davies shifted his line of questioning. "Ms. Wilson, you were with Abby the day she disappeared, correct?" Mary Ann nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "Yes, we were in the sunroom. Abby was playing with her dolls, and I answered that phone call." "About your daughter being in the hospital," Mr. Davies filled in. "Yes, but then we found out Amanda was never at the hospital that day." Richard sat up straight. "What do you mean?" "I called Amanda afterward when everything happened. She was perfectly fine at home. She never called me." Mr. Davies exchanged a significant look with Richard. "And did you mention this to anyone at the time?" "I told the police, but they didn't seem to take it seriously." Movement in the garden drew their attention again. Abby had stopped playing and was standing frozen, staring at something. Ethan recognized the expression. It was the one she got when a memory was surfacing. "I'll get her," he said, already heading for the door. In the garden, Abby remained motionless, her eyes fixed on a spot near the fountain. When Ethan approached, she spoke without looking at him. "It was here." "What was here, little one?" "Where she took me," Abby answered in a strangely distant voice. "I was playing with my dolls." Mary Ann went to answer the phone, and then— Ethan crouched beside her as the others followed him out, observing with palpable tension. "What happened then, Abby?" Vivian asked gently, moving closer. "She said she had a surprise for me, that we were going on a special trip." Abby frowned, as if struggling to recapture the memory. "She was wearing that strong perfume that always makes me sneeze." Richard and Vivian exchanged alarmed glances. Only one person in the family wore a perfume that made Abby react that way. "Sweetheart," Richard said, his voice calm despite the storm in his chest. "Can you remember who it was?" Abby started to answer, but her eyes flicked towards the glass doors of the sunroom. Veronica was standing inside, watching them. The moment their eyes met, Abby threw herself into Ethan's arms, trembling violently. "Don't let her take me again," she whispered against his chest. "Please, Daddy, don't let her." The word Daddy was clearly for Ethan, not Richard, but no one seemed to notice. Abby's visceral reaction was all the proof they needed. Mr. Davies gave a discreet signal, and two of his assistants began to move casually toward the sunroom doors. Veronica, sensing the shift, backed away into the mansion. "I think we need to continue this conversation somewhere more private," Mr. Davies suggested. Everyone silently agreed. Ethan carried Abby, who refused to let go, back into the house, with Martha following protectively. In the library, Abby finally began to calm down, especially after Martha made her some hot chocolate, a familiar comfort from the farm. That's when Vivian had an idea. "Abby, honey," she began gently, "would you like to look at some photo albums? We have lots of pictures of you when you were younger." Abby hesitated, then nodded, still clinging to Ethan's hand. Vivian brought out several elegant albums, and soon they were all sitting together, flipping through the pages. It was a Christmas photo from 2 years prior that changed everything. It showed the whole family in front of a lavishly decorated tree. What stood out wasn't the decor, but the way Veronica was looking at Richard from the corner of the frame. "That look," Abby said suddenly, her voice small but clear. She always looked at Daddy Richard like that when Mom wasn't watching. Vivian went pale, her hands trembling on the album. Richard looked as if he'd been struck. Memories of small, seemingly innocent moments and comments suddenly took on a new, disturbing meaning. Mr. Davies watched carefully. The picture was becoming clear. A long-held obsession, a faked phone call, conveniently malfunctioning cameras, a missing child. "Mr. Sterling," he said discreetly, "I believe we should discuss additional security measures." Richard nodded stiffly, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. How had he not seen it? A clap of thunder rattled the windows, making Abby flinch. Martha immediately began to hum softly, another comforting ritual from the farm, and Abby relaxed slightly. "No one will hurt you," Ethan promised, kissing the top of her head. Never again. Vivian watched the interaction with a mix of gratitude and pain. This man, this stranger, had become a safe harbor for her daughter in a way she was still struggling to be. But this wasn't the time for jealousy. It was the time to protect Abby. "Mr. Davies," she called, her voice steady despite her emotions, "I want my sister out of this house. Immediately." "Already taken care of," he replied. "2 of my men are discreetly monitoring her every move as we speak." Upstairs, oblivious to the storm brewing below, Veronica Morgan methodically packed a small suitcase. Her movements were calm, but a disturbing gleam shone in her eyes as she glanced out the window at the group in the garden. The truth was unraveling, memory by memory, and with it a frightening question lingered. How far would Veronica go to keep her secrets buried? Ethan pulled Abby closer, his protective instincts on high alert. The girl he'd found in the snow, who had brought light back into his life, now needed him more than ever, and he was determined not to fail her. Martha placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, a silent promise of support. Together, they had created a haven for Abby on the farm. Now they would help her face the ghosts of her past. Richard and Vivian came closer, sitting on either side of Ethan and Abby. In that moment, all social barriers vanished. They were just people united by their love for a little girl, determined to keep her safe. The storm finally broke outside, but inside the Sterling Mansion library, Abby was secure, surrounded by people who would give their lives for her. The painful truths would be faced together, as a family, not the one anyone expected, but the one fate, in its unpredictable wisdom, had forged. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke over the Sterling Mansion. Thunder echoed through the grand halls, as if the house itself was shuddering at the revelations to come. Abby was curled in Ethan's lap, her small fingers clutching his shirt as she watched the rain lash against the tall library windows. Martha sat nearby, a comforting presence. Richard and Vivian were on the sofa, their anxiety palpable, while Mr. Davies organized his papers on the desk. The sharp click of high heels on the marble floor shattered the tense quiet. Abby instantly tensed, and before anyone could speak, her terrified whisper filled the room. It was her. Aunt Veronica took me. The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica stood in the library doorway, as elegant as ever in her Chanel suit, but her expression had changed. The mask had begun to slip, revealing something much darker. "Abby, dear," Veronica said, her voice attempting a syrupy sweetness that now sounded hollow. "Whatever are you talking about?" You said you had a surprise, Abby continued, her voice gaining strength as the memories solidified. That we were going on a special trip. But then it got so cold, and I was scared. Veronica took a step into the room, but stopped as two of Mr. Davies's assistants discreetly positioned themselves near the door. Abby, Mr. Davies said gently but firmly, can you tell us more about that day? The girl nodded, still clinging to Ethan, but meeting her aunt's gaze. It was snowing. Mary Ann had gone to answer the phone. Aunt Veronica said Mommy had asked her to take me somewhere special. This is ridiculous, Veronica interjected, but her voice had lost its practiced calm. Vivian, you can't possibly believe this. The phone, Vivian said slowly, the pieces clicking into place. The fake call to Mary Ann. That was you. Veronica laughed, a high, brittle sound. You've always been so slow on the uptake, haven't you, little sister? Just like when you failed to notice that Richard and I... Veronica. Richard's voice was like a whip. Don't you dare. Don't I dare? Veronica turned on him, years of bitterness and obsession pouring out. I've loved you for 20 years, Richard, ever since Vivian introduced us in college. I was perfect for you, smart, sophisticated, ambitious. But you chose her, sweet, innocent Vivian, who didn't even know how to appreciate wine properly. Vivian went pale, recalling years of subtle slights that now made horrifying sense, the backhanded compliments, the way Veronica always seemed to appear when Richard was alone, the overly lavish gifts. So you kidnapped our daughter, Vivian asked, her voice shaking. Out of jealousy? Kidnapping is such an ugly word, Veronica sneered, a smile devoid of warmth on her face. I just wanted you to feel a fraction of the pain I felt, watching you live the life that should have been mine. The mansion, the perfect husband, the adorable little girl. How could you? Richard stood, his voice tight with fury. Abby is an innocent child. She could have died in that snow. Oh, please. Veronica rolled her eyes. I had everything planned. A discreet country house, far from everything. Abby would have been well looked after until you realized Vivian wasn't the perfect wife you thought, that she couldn't even protect her own daughter. But I got lost, Abby interrupted, her voice small but firm. You stopped the car to take a phone call, and I was so scared, so I ran. Veronica's composure finally shattered. You weren't supposed to run. Everything was perfect. The fake phone call, the security cameras, even a replacement nanny for when Vivian inevitably had a breakdown. Ms. Morgan, Mr. Davies said firmly, signaling to his assistants, we can continue this conversation at the police station. It was as if something snapped. In a swift, shocking motion, Veronica pulled a small revolver from her handbag. No! She screamed, her mask of sophistication dissolving completely. You don't understand. It was supposed to be perfect. Richard would finally see that Vivian wasn't good enough for him, that I was always the right choice. What happened next was a blur of professional efficiency. Mr. Davies's assistants disarmed Veronica before she could do anything catastrophic. Abby buried her face in Ethan's chest as he shielded her with his body, while Martha stood protectively in front of them. As the police officers handcuffed Veronica, she continued to shout, her voice a crazed mix of rage and pleading, Richard, please, everything I did, it was for you. It was always for you. Get her out of here, Richard ordered, his tone glacial, and see to it she never comes near my family again. When Veronica was finally gone, a heavy silence fell. Vivian trembled, reeling from the depth of her own sister's betrayal. Richard embraced her, his face a mask of guilt and horror. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have seen. No, Vivian said softly. None of us realized. She was my sister. I never imagined. Abby finally lifted her head, looking at her parents with tear-filled eyes. You're not mad at me for running? Oh, my love, Vivian said, kneeling beside the chair where Ethan held Abby. You were so brave. If you hadn't run, if Ethan hadn't found you. The mention of Ethan brought the new reality to the forefront. Abby clung to him again, as if sensing the coming shift. "I don't want to leave Daddy Ethan," she cried, fresh tears streaming down her face. Richard and Vivian exchanged a look. Over the past days, they had seen the profound bond between their daughter and the farmer who had rescued her. "Abby, sweetheart," Richard began gently, "Ethan has become a very important part of your life. We see that, and we will always be grateful to him for taking such good care of you." "But you're going to take me away," she sobbed. "We don't have to decide everything right now," Martha interjected soothingly. "It's been a very intense day for everyone." Ethan, who had been silent through the confession, finally spoke. "Abby, little one, look at me." She raised her tear-stained face. "Your parents love you very much," he continued, his own voice unsteady. "They never stopped looking for you, never gave up hope. And now that they finally have you—" "But I love you too," she said, cutting him off. "And I love you more than anything," he managed, his voice trembling. "Which is exactly why we have to figure out what's best for you." Richard stepped closer, an idea forming. "Mr. Miller?" "Ethan. Perhaps we can find a way for Abby not to have to choose between her families." Vivian immediately understood. "Isn't the property next to your farm for sale? The old Olson place?" Ethan blinked, surprised. "Yes, but—" "We've always wanted a country house," Richard went on. "A place where Abby could grow up knowing more than ballrooms and social events. What if," Vivian concluded, "what if we buy that property? As a second home. That way, Abby can spend time with both families, the best of both worlds." No one had considered it. It was a radical, brilliant plan that would allow Abby to keep both worlds that now defined her. "You would do that?" Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything you've done for our daughter," Vivian smiled through her tears. "It's the least we can do." Abby looked from one adult to another, hope dawning in her eyes. "So I can have both? The mansion and the farm? All of you?" "Yes, my love," Richard said, stroking her hair. "You can have all of us." Martha discreetly wiped a tear. Love for one small child had united people from vastly different worlds. Ethan still held Abby, but his embrace felt different. Not the desperate grip of someone afraid of loss, but the secure touch of someone who knew he would always have a place in her life. The storm outside began to subside, as if nature itself knew the worst was over. Veronica was on her way to face justice, but in the Sterling Mansion library, a new family was being born, an unconventional family, bound not by blood, but by love, understanding, and the desire to make a child happy. Abby finally relaxed completely in Ethan's arms, the day's exhaustion catching up to her. A faint smile touched her lips, the smile of someone truly at peace. "I think it's time someone went to bed," Martha said softly. "Can I hear a story?" Abby asked drowsily. "One of Daddy Ethan's stories about the stars." "Of course you can, little one," Ethan replied, exchanging a meaningful look with Richard and Vivian. "And maybe your parents would like to listen too." The invitation was more than a bedtime story. It was an offer to merge their two worlds. Richard and Vivian accepted with grateful smiles. As the small group headed up the stairs to Abby's room, Mr. Davies watched from the library, finishing his notes. In all his years, he had seen many cases end in tragedy. It was a comfort, he thought, to witness one where, despite the pain, a path toward healing and love had been found. The last light of day filtered through the windows, painting the room in soft gold. Somewhere in the city, Veronica faced the start of a long legal battle. But here, a different kind of family gathered to hear stories about the stars and how sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us exactly where we need to be. Spring was in full bloom, turning the fields into an endless tapestry of wildflowers. At the old Olson property, now owned by the Sterlings, the sound of hammers and saws filled the air as renovations progressed. The once neglected farm was being transformed into something new, a bridge between two worlds. Richard Sterling, surprisingly comfortable in jeans and a work shirt, was overseeing the installation of large French doors that would open onto a view of Ethan's neighboring wheat fields. His hands, usually accustomed to signing documents, now sported a few proud calluses. "The sunset is going to be amazing from here," he remarked as Ethan approached, carrying a stack of lumber. "Abby's always loved colors," Ethan answered, a smile touching his lips at the mention of the little girl who had so completely changed his life. "She has a special way of describing every shade in the sky. Last night she told me the clouds looked like cotton candy dipped in gold." Richard chuckled, recognizing his daughter's vivid imagination. "She's always had a knack for words. When she was smaller, before—" He hesitated. Before all this happened, she'd make up elaborate stories about the paintings in the mansion. The two men shared a moment of silent understanding. The month since Veronica's arrest had been a time of adjustment, healing, and surprising discoveries. The project to renovate the farm had become a symbol of their unlikely but harmonious union. "Daddy! Daddy Ethan!" The beloved familiar call rang out, and both men turned automatically. Abby came running, her golden curls bouncing in the sun, followed by Vivian and Martha carrying picnic baskets. "We brought lunch," she announced, throwing herself first into Ethan's arms, then rushing to hug Richard. The ease with which she moved between them was a testament to how well things had settled. "And from the smell," Ethan said, sniffing the air dramatically and making Abby giggle. "Martha made that apple pie you love so much." "With extra cinnamon," Martha confirmed, winking at Abby. "And I also brought that special cheese Richard likes. Vivian showed me where to find it. This was how it was now, small kindnesses and gestures of consideration that flowed naturally between them, building bridges. Vivian, revealing a hidden talent for interior design, was blending rustic charm with elegant comfort. Martha contributed her practical knowledge of the land and seasons. Ethan offered his vital expertise on farming and maintenance, while Richard applied his organizational skills to keep the project on schedule. And Abby was the heart of it all, her infectious enthusiasm turning the work into an adventure. "Look what I found in the field!" she exclaimed, opening a small backpack and carefully pulling out an empty bird's nest. "Can we put it on a shelf in my new room for decoration?" "How about we put it on the porch instead?" Vivian suggested gently. "That way, maybe the birds can use it again next spring." Abby considered this with the gravity she applied to all important decisions. "Okay, but then I need to draw it first, so I won't forget how pretty it is." "How about we do that after lunch?" Martha proposed, already spreading a blanket on the newly extended, unfinished porch. They all sat together, Abby happily bouncing between Ethan's and Richard's laps, sharing stories of her week in the city and her grand plans for the garden she wanted to plant. "Can we plant sunflowers like the ones at Daddy Ethan's farm?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "And also those purple flowers Mommy likes. What are they called again?" "Lavender," Vivian replied, sharing a smile with Ethan. "And maybe some rose bushes, too." "The white ones that glow under the moonlight," Abby exclaimed. "And we can hang a swing on that big tree. Daddy Ethan makes the best swings." This was her new normal, a perfect fusion of the sophisticated world she had known and the simple joys she had discovered. The weekends on the farm became a sacred tradition. Richard and Vivian learned to appreciate the quiet of the countryside, while Ethan became a regular welcome presence at the family city events. His quiet kindness had won over even the most skeptical of the Sterling social circle. At the last charity gala, Abby had insisted her first dance be with him, to the delight of the photographers. "I just remembered something," Abby suddenly exclaimed, jumping from Richard's lap. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack. It was a drawing of the new house, complete with the French doors, the expanded porch, and sunflowers that hadn't even been planted yet. "I see you included a new stable," Richard noted, studying the picture. Abby bit her lip, glancing hopefully at her parents. "It's just—" "Well, I was thinking, since we'll spend so much time here." "You want a pony?" Vivian concluded, laughing softly. "Only if it can be like Miss Beatrice," Abby added quickly, referring to the gentle mare on the neighboring farm. "I think we can consider that," Richard said, exchanging a look with the other adults. "But let's finish the house first, okay?" Abby agreed solemnly, though her eyes glowed at the prospect. After lunch, she convinced Ethan to take her to his farm to feed the chickens, a routine she refused to abandon. Richard and Vivian watched from the new porch, their hearts full. "She's so happy," Vivian said, watching Abby laugh as she and Ethan scattered feed. "Sometimes I wonder if we would have ever found her without him." "It's best not to think about that," Richard replied, taking her hand. "What matters is that she's here now, with more love in her life than we ever could have imagined." Martha joined them with a pitcher of fresh lemonade. "Sometimes the best families are the ones we create, not the ones we are born into," she said softly, a statement that carried extra weight after Veronica's betrayal. The afternoon passed in a gentle haze of joy. As the sun set, painting the sky in the exact colors Richard had predicted, they gathered for an outdoor dinner. "I think it's time to share our news," Richard said, clearing his throat after dessert. "Ethan, Martha, we'd like to invite you to spend Christmas with us this year, at the mansion." Abby clapped her hands in delight. "Please say yes. There'll be a huge tree, and we can decorate it all together. And Daddy Ethan can help me make Christmas cookies like last year." Ethan and Martha exchanged emotional looks. The invitation to one of the Sterlings' most important family traditions meant more than words could say. "It would be an honor," Ethan replied, his voice husky. "And I promise not to burn the cookies this time," Martha teased, lightening the moment. Night settled, and the fireflies began their dance. Abby, who had been demonstrating her star-spotting skills, learned from Ethan, to Richard, finally began to doze in Ethan's lap. It was time to decide where she would sleep, at her parents' new farm or at Ethan's familiar one. These choices were now easy, with Abby alternating between the two. "Can I sleep at Daddy Ethan's farm tonight?" she asked, already half asleep. "Then tomorrow at the new house." "I want to help pick the color for my room?" "Of course you can, sweetheart," Richard answered, kissing her forehead, his voice free of any insecurity, filled only with gratitude. Ethan carried her across the fields under the moonlight, the others following. In her room, kept exactly as it was, Abby snuggled under the covers. "Good night, Mommy and Daddy," she murmured, giving Richard and Vivian kisses. "Good night, Daddy Ethan and Aunt Martha." "Sleep tight, my love," Vivian whispered, tucking her in. "Sweet dreams, little one," Ethan added, the same ritual from her first nights with him. As Abby drifted off, a soft smile on her lips, the adults gathered on Ethan's porch. The future stretched out before them, vast and full of promise. Sarah served coffee, and they sat in the quiet, enjoying the stillness. In her room, Emily shifted in her sleep, dreaming of tomorrow's adventures. And so, under a starry spring sky, the miracle that began in a snowy field reached its perfect conclusion. It was not an ending, but a new beginning. The most beautiful stories are not the ones that end with happily ever after, but those that show us happiness can be found in the most unexpected places, and that true love creates families that transcend all convention. Abby now had 2 homes, 2 sets of parents, and more love than any heart could hold. And in the end, that was what truly mattered, not the blood in her veins, but the love that filled her heart, not the names on a birth certificate, but the people who chose every day to be part of her life. The wind whispered through the wheat fields, carrying the promise of brighter days, and on 2 neighboring farms, united by one small girl with golden curls. A remarkable family continued to grow, learn, and love, proving that real miracles happen every day in the small moments of love and understanding we share with those we choose to call family.